Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I'm 26 years old, and for a majority of my life I've lived in haunted houses or areas. This has included 7 different houses, 2 haunted areas of land, and staying short-term at 2 different houses, visiting home for the holidays and such. I've had too many encounters to remember everything, and they've ranged from mundane to me being attacked or threatened, and for a short time, dealing with either a Skinwalker or a Wendigo. Not a lot of OC these days, so I figured I'd contribute if there's interest. So, does anyone want me to continue? And any requests? My favorite thing is my encounters with a Wendigo or Skinwalker. Happened 7 or so years ago at the time I was staying at my grandma's place. Before I get to the main bit, a little backstory is needed. My grandma lives on the ass end of a dirt road in Michigan, surrounded on all sides by woods. Her and my grandpa have lived there for like 50 years, and my grandpa loved walking in the woods. However, every time he went, he took a gun with him for wild dogs, and he wouldn't let his kids stay out there after dark. Also, I never once saw him go into the woods at night, and my grandma refused to leave the house after sundown. Where their house sits is in the southern reaches of Wendigo country, and Michigan has a decent number of reported Skinwalker sightings. Anyone familiar with both can note certain similarities, which is why I'm unsure which I dealt with. Actual story will start in my next post, switching to my laptop for simplicity. One thing I forgot to mention. My grandmother closed the curtains on every window before sundown, after my grandpa died anyway, and got pissed if anyone opened them. So these events took place over about a month. I had been living at my grandmother's for a couple months and was bored. No internet plus no TV control plus no cell reception makes OP something something. Unfortunately, it was late winter when I moved in, which means outdoor activities were an impossibility due to the extreme cold. Once it started warming up though, I started hanging out outside a lot more, as it was better than watching House or CSI around the clock. Seriously, all she watched. As time went on, I started walking in the woods more and more. At first I kinda hung out at the edge of the woods to smoke cigarettes. 19, but would have gotten kicked out if she found out. But soon I ventured further and further. As a kid, I went on a lot of walks through there with my grandpa, and it was nice to walk where we used to and reminisce about when he was alive. Eventually, I was spending hours in the woods, never felt more at home. After a few weeks of this, though, I started to feel a little uncomfortable if I ventured too far, and soon I couldn't go in without feeling disturbed. It is important to note at this point that I do not scare easily. Dealing with all the stuff I have, coupled with the fact that I actually enjoy being alone and feel safer this way, means that I tend to have nerves of steel. The fact that every now and then I could hear something trailing me didn't help, nor did the occasional sounds of distant voices, fully willing to admit that the last bit could have actually been people. After a while, I started going into the woods less and less, until it hit the point that I only stepped out to have a smoke. By this point, it had started to get warm enough at night that I could leave my window open. It was still only in the 50s, but I love fresh air, and being from Michigan means I'm hardened against cold weather. This is the time when things started to get bad. By this point, I'd gotten a cheap laptop, which I primarily used for watching movies at night. I'd head to bed around 10 and then stay up for a few hours watching DVDs on it. One night while in the middle of some classic anime, Lodos War, I started hearing some crashing in the woods, which happened to start about 10 feet from my window. Paused my show and listened for a bit. Whatever was out there seemed pretty big, judging by how much of a goddamn ruckus it was making. The noise was somewhat far off at first, but I noticed that as time went on, it began to get closer. Not really anything super exciting ended up happening. I just closed the window and blinds and went to bed. A few nights went by and I started opening my window at night again, because fuck whatever that was, my room was stuffy. started doing my thing again, and whatever was outside started doing its thing. This time I decided to watch out the window for a bit and see if I could catch a glimpse of anything. So I shut my laptop, bathed the room in darkness, and let my eyes adjust. For anyone who has never been in the middle of nowhere on a cloudy Michigan night, it's darker than a well excavator's ass out there, so I needed my eyes as adjusted as possible. I crouched down in front of the window and watched and listened. Sure enough, just like last time, the noises began getting closer. Couldn't see shit out there at first, could only make out the tree line. However, after about 10 minutes, I started to see something out there. Took me a minute to realize the reality of the situation. What I saw out there were two large glowing orbs, colored a pale yellowish. They were a very short distance apart and actually seemed pretty big. They got pretty close to the house, and judging from what I saw, they were at least 4 inches wide and stood maybe 10 or 12 feet off the ground. As some of you may have already guessed, it was very likely that the orbs were eyes, or at least that's the conclusion I came to. That window got slammed and locked in an instant, and I slept on the couch that night. That wasn't the last time I left that window open, though. About a week later, I decided I didn't give a shit about whatever might be out there. The lack of fresh air was making it difficult to sleep, and so the window went open yet again. My solution to the issue of whatever I had seen out there was just to say fuck it and go to sleep earlier. So that's what I did, and for a few days I got a pretty good amount of sleep. This didn't last, unfortunately, as after a while I started waking up in the middle of the night for what seemed like no reason. I'd lay there with a somewhat uncomfortable feeling in my stomach for a while, but would eventually fall back asleep. Up until that point, I had slept with my back to the window, because that was the side I was most comfortable on. But on this night, I rolled over and was greeted by those two large orbs staring into my window from the edge of the woods. I had the window open for about 10 days at that point. It had likely been watching me sleep for a while. This here's the last bit of this encounter. I ended up moving out not too long after this, as a room opened up at my dad's place and he had internet. It wasn't long after this happened that every now and then I'd hear a tapping on the living room window at night. I never thought much of it though, as there were a lot of things that could have caused it. It was just 1 or 2 taps and then gone. It happened every night, but again, I gave no shits. It was about this time that my grandma had to go out of town for a couple nights, and I was excited. The TV was about all there was to do around there, and as I mentioned before, my grandma controlled everything that went on it. It might seem weird to be so excited over something so little as picking TV shows for a couple days, but I can almost guarantee that there is an underestimation of how boring it was out there. So, Grandma leaves, I flip on some interesting show, and spaced out. Didn't seem like long before night came, and without my grandma there, none of the curtains got closed. I think that this encouraged whatever was out there. After a short while of darkness, I heard a tap on the window. Looked and didn't see anything. This happened a few more times with the same results. At this point, I did think it was a little weird that the tapping was more frequent tonight, but not enough to do anything about it. During the commercials, my eyes tended to wander toward the window. I hate commercials, and the darkness beyond that glass seemed more interesting. It wasn't very interesting either. I saw what was making the tapping noise. I saw it. As I watched, a hand extended from the darkness to the side of the window, pretty much right on the edge of the woods, hit the glass, then snaked back into the darkness. The hand did not look human at all. It was pale white to a sickly point, looked bony, and had super elongated fingers. It was after immediately closing the blinds and several minutes of deep breathing that I figured it out. My uncle would come over and visit pretty frequently, usually once a week or so. You can't hear knocks on the front door from the living room, so when he did, he'd knock on the window. At that point, I'd go let him in, or sometimes I'd go out there and we'd talk outside for a little bit. It was trying to lure me outside. After that moment, I closed the curtains at sundown and refused to go outside after dark had set in. I wish I had a better ending to this story, but as I said, I moved out not long after. Only ever go out there for family gatherings now, which are only really during the day. Unfortunately, my grandma died a few months ago, so it's unlikely that I'll ever end up going back there. This is probably my favorite thing to have happened to me. Sounds weird saying it like that, but I love the paranormal. But there are other things, including possessed statues, my friends seeing what seemed to be a banshee in my backyard, being pretty much stalked by something evil, and a bunch more. Took this while on a tour of the old mental hospital in Traverse City. It wasn't like a ghost tour or anything like that, it was a historical tour. I'm majoring in psychology and that shit's interesting, especially this particular place. It wasn't a violent place or anything either. It operated on the principles of moral treatment, which were established by Thomas Kirkbride. Essentially, restraints were not allowed. The patients were treated extremely well by the staff. Their mental treatments included things such as gardening, fresh air, and warm baths. Between things such as that or the cutting-edge infrastructure, the place is fascinating. The last thing that happens on the tour is you get to take a walk through one of the old steam tunnels. I took this picture down one of the side tunnels. Not only are you not allowed down them, but at this moment I was the last person in the tunnels. Everyone else had been led through the exit. Just after this, the tour guide yelled at me for lagging behind so much. So a bit of backstory and something of note. Both of these statues are a little broken. You can kind of see it in the pictures. They came from Haiti sometime in the 80s, and the massive change in climate has not been kind to them. My uncle Mike bought them while he was stationed down in Haiti. His story is that he bought them from a voodoo church, along with some smaller statues, a giant wood carving, and several paintings of blood rituals. I don't have pictures of these, but I've seen them all, and my uncle isn't a bullshitter, so I'm inclined to believe him. The statues started out at his parents'. My grandparents on my dad's side, not the same ones from the previous posts. Along with the rest of the stuff, they didn't want it in their house, so it sat in their garage for a while, until my dad went over there and took them one day sometime in the early 90s. We had them in the living room for a while, but they freaked out my stepmom. I'll get to that stuff in a minute. So they got moved into the basement. From there, they got shuffled around down there until our basement got a massive cleaning, and my room got moved down there. The actual story starts in the next post, but it's not terribly long, so it'll likely only take that post. So the reason my stepmom made my dad move them into the basement is a pretty simple one. They move on their own. From what she says, if she got up in the middle of the night for one reason or another, she'd walk through the living room and they'd be facing out the window. She'd go out into the kitchen to get a drink or use the bathroom, and when she came back, they'd be facing her direction. Now, I always take these stories with a grain of salt for two reasons. The first is that even at such a young age, I knew to approach any situation with skepticism, and the second is that my dad likes to mess with people, and I wouldn't put it past him to do this to scare her. He says he didn't, but I don't know. What I do know is that I never liked the statues and was happy to see them go away. For reference, I was about 6 when that happened. Fast forward 5 years later to when I was a wee little 11-year-old. Up until this point, I hadn't had my own room at my dad's. My parents got divorced when I was real little, maybe a year old, and my mom got custody. I lived with my mom, so I was only over there like 2 weekends a month, so it was never a big deal. Usually I'd just sleep in my little sister's room. She was my stepmom's kid. She lived there. When I turned 11, though, I got my own room in the basement. Our basement was one big open room and I was just kind of in the corner, but I was still young enough that privacy wasn't a huge concern for me yet. For a lot of my life, our basement was pretty messy. It was messy enough that a mentally ill homeless man hid and lived down there for 2 weeks without us knowing. Not a joke there, by the way. It was one of the few events in my life that was creepy and not related to the paranormal. Anyway, though, We spent an entire weekend cleaning it out and moving my bed down there and such. Didn't get a chance to try it out, but I was super excited to sleep down there the next time I was over. Now I'm fully willing to admit that I may have been a slightly creepy kid, being excited to sleep in a basement. Incidentally, when they moved, I chose to have my new room in yet another basement, and one of my favorite things to do was take walks through the cemetery across the road from where I live with my mom. Either way, I was excited. When I went over to my dad's next, he warned me that they had had to move a few things around down there, so my room wasn't quite how it had been. But I didn't give a shit. At least not until I actually went down there. You see, when I went down there, I noticed that the two statues, which had previously been behind a pile of plywood in my sister's old bed, there's a story with that bed as well, were now completely out in the open. I did not like the fact that they were just sitting right there, but I wasn't about to say anything either, as I was still happy to have my own room. I ended up staying there pretty much from the time I got to my dad's till bedtime, which was about 5 or so. I had a little black and white TV in there that I was all jazzed about, and between that and my toys there seemed to be a multitude of things to keep me busy. To be honest, I kind of forgot about the statues until I went to sleep. Nobody had really thought about it, but given the lighting scheme, it was either pitch black or all the lights were on, no in between. So when bedtime hit, I was completely bathed in darkness. This wasn't really a problem for me though, as I've always liked the dark. Did I mention I was kind of a creepy kid? I had forgotten all about the statues by this point, and was happily laying in bed, thinking about whatever kids think about. Quite a while had passed, and I was still awake. Not really a surprise because as a kid it would sometimes take hours for me to fall asleep. I began to hear a weird noise though. From across the basement I began to hear what sounded like someone picking up a large piece of wood a few inches, and then dropping it. It would happen every few seconds and I couldn't figure it out. I knew there was no one else in the basement because you can clearly hear when someone walks around upstairs, so I would have heard them going to the basement door. This went on for a short while before my heart sank. I remembered that the statues were over in that direction and completely exposed. Being a kid, my response was to hide under the covers until I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I was actually a little confused as to why I was under the covers, until I threw them off me anyway. When I did, there were the statues. One was at the foot of my bed and the other was at the side of it, less than a foot from where my head had been. Now, the obvious thing to think here would be that my dad moved them after I had fallen asleep. I did say he'd like to mess with people after all. However, he wouldn't have done that to someone so young. Also, when I told him what happened, he moved the statues back behind a bunch of shit where there was no chance of them moving around the basement anymore. There's also the matter of the sounds I heard. Before my dad moved them, I took the opportunity to pick one up and drop it from a couple inches off the ground. The sound was a dead match. So sometime around the time I was 7 or 8, my little sister got a new bed. Maybe new isn't the right word, as we got it at a yard sale, but it was new to her. The sides of the bed were made of pretty thick plywood and had a giant rabbit painted on them. The back was completely open, and the front was partially open, but had a board going across the front with her name on it, which is why we bought it. I realize my description of it is awful, but it was actually pretty nice. The thing to take away from the description is that it was hollow underneath. It was actually a pretty nice bed, and we only paid a few bucks for it. It's funny to look back and think about how that's always the case in horror movies. My little sister loved that bed at first. I say at first because after about a week she stopped loving it and began to tell us some kind of creepy things. She mentioned how she could hear a voice calling her name from beneath it, or about how sometimes a hand came out from under it. My parents blew it off because she was little. Again, horror movie-esque, and I'd like to take a moment to state that if my kids ever start randomly being creepy like this, I am not going to make this mistake. Eventually, she stopped sleeping in the bed altogether, preferring to sleep on the floor or with my stepmom and dad. Now this is important. Take a second and think back on your lives. Have you ever experienced something so traumatic that your mind has blocked that memory? Like you know what happened from secondhand accounts, but you cannot remember that exact memory? If not, this is actually pretty common. In times of extreme trauma or stress, your mind will sometimes black out that memory in an effort to help keep you from losing your shit. Keep that in mind for this next part. I have no memory of any part of this, I just have what I've been told and some after effects of it. During the week of Christmas, I stayed at my dad's house. During that time, I ended up sleeping in my little sister's bed since she wasn't using it. On the fourth night of sleeping there, I woke up my parents complaining about the witch under the bed who wouldn't stop laughing. That's what I've been told, I said. I have a fairly decent memory. I remember things from the time leading up to that week, and I remember that Christmas, which happened a couple days later. But I have no memory whatsoever of the days in between. The only other times in my life where I have memories completely blocked out are a really nasty car crash I was in, and a few instances of bullying as a kid. What I do know, though, is that after that I had to jump to and from my bed and couldn't get near the space underneath. When I was in bed, I had to have the blankets completely tucked under me. They couldn't be hanging down at all. Getting too close to that gap or having my blanket hanging down would cause me to have panic attacks, which no kid that age should have. It's also a good point to mention that I'm extremely uncomfortable sleeping in a bed that sits off the ground. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but piecing together things based on all that leads to some pretty screwed up conclusions. After I left my grandma's, I ended up at my dad's place and yet again in a basement. It didn't have actual walls, just blankets hanging down to partition it off, but no one ever came down there anyway due to the fact that the basement was creepy as hell. This took place over the course of 4 or 5 months, after which I ended up moving to Kentucky for a short period of time. As I'm sure you've all noticed, I tend to move around a lot, a fact that still hasn't changed. Moving again this fall. As before, story to follow. Something important to note before I continue is that the blankets weren't completely spaced right. In several places, they didn't quite come together, and a small sliver of light would shine through. That basement has always had a bad feeling to it. It's the kind of place where you run up the stairs because it feels like something's chasing you out. In all the places I've lived, I've never had that feeling anywhere else. There are a lot of random incidents, electronics going off when they shouldn't, or unnatural sounds, but nothing really like this. I lived down there without any major incidents for a couple of months, but once the rest of my family moved out, shit got knocked into 10th gear. My older sister had bought a place that needed a lot of fixing up, and rather than constantly going back and forth to help, the rest of my family just moved in temporarily. I didn't mind this because it meant that essentially I was a 19-year-old who owned a house. Great for parties and such, I can say that for sure. About a week after they left, the first major thing in this chain happened. I was taking a shower, just kind of doing my thing. As I stepped out, I glanced at the mirror and saw the reflection of another person, which naturally made me jump. As previously mentioned, not a lot gets to me, and while it startled me at first, it didn't take long for me to be perfectly fine again. In fact, I started talking to it. I had kind of gotten into the habit of saying hello and whatnot whenever I felt like there was a spirit nearby. I figured that if I were dead and was either ignored or feared, some pleasantries would go a long way. After I had dressed and dried off, I headed down to my room and thought no more of it. Couldn't tell you exactly what I did until I went to bed, but knowing me, it was probably something inane and included the internet. Woke up the next day, and like a lot of people in my age group, I went immediately to my desk. Goddamn, do I love me some internet. It was maybe an hour after that it happened. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, it was like a camera flash went off. It was just this sudden bright light that went away as quick as it came. The only difference is that there was no after image. No one else was there, and there was nothing that could have caused this, which left me kind of baffled. I just shrugged it off and went on with my day. Over the course of the next week, this odd occurrence continued to happen to me, probably 2 or 3 times a day. I still have no idea what it was, and it went away as suddenly as it came. Still being me and giving no fucks, the previous event didn't bother me. This next one did, though. It was a short time after the flashes stopped, and I went to bed with everything the same as it always was. When I woke up, though, I noticed my glasses weren't where I always left them. Took me a few minutes of looking to find them all the way across the room. Odd, but no fucks given yet. When I put them on and turned on the light, I noticed that they weren't the only thing misplaced. I'm by no means a neat person, but there are things that always go in the same place, and quite a few of them were moved. A mug that I got when I graduated, which had since spent its life on my desk and was full of random shit, was dumped in the corner. A small box of mementos my girlfriend had given me that always sat on my footlocker wasn't even in my room. Every single container that could be opened or closed now sat open, with the contents looking like someone had rifled through all of it. Rather than disturbing me, this actually pissed me off. Something had gone through my shit. This was something that I didn't even let my family or friends do, much less some non-corporeal douchebag. By this point, I actually knew quite a lot about the paranormal, and decided that I wasn't going to just let this go. I immediately told whatever had done this that it was no longer welcome in my room, that I was kicking it out, then proceeded to smudge the room and burn incense. If it was going to touch my stuff, it could get the fuck out. Much like I figured, this was the last time I ever felt a presence in that room, but it wasn't the last I saw of that entity. Remember how I mentioned that there was always a bad feeling in that basement? After that, it intensified, by a hell of a lot. At that point, whenever I stepped out into the basement, I could feel something evil, and it felt like it was staring me down. I wasn't going to let it stop me from enjoying the freedom of having the house to myself, though. Truth be told, I lived there for another few months until I moved to Kentucky to be closer to the previously mentioned girlfriend. Because of how the blankets hung, a small amount of light always used to shine through onto my wall. The basement was too dark to see anything, even during the day, without a light on, so I always left one on in the back. Not long after I banished the what's-it from my room, I began to notice that every now and then, a shadow would pass by those slivers of light. At first, I genuinely thought it was my imagination, but I soon ruled this out. For a short time, I also thought that maybe there was someone in the basement, but this was always ruled out with a very quick check. I was never frightened of this. I just noted it and filed it away in my mental repository of weird shit. Maybe a week or 2 later, I was sitting in my room when I thought I heard something from my door. I paused the video I was watching, but after not hearing anything else, assumed I was mistaken. I thought I heard something again later that night, but didn't even bother stopping the video. Later, when I was trying to fall asleep, I heard it nice and clear. It was a low growling, animalistic. We didn't have any pets there at the time, so that ruled that out, and it couldn't have been the furnace or hot water heater kicking on because they were loud. No matter how I tried, I couldn't figure out a logical explanation for it, especially once it came again, louder this time. I did the only rational thing, what anyone would do in that situation, told it to fuck off and fell asleep. It didn't seem to get the message, though, as I began to hear it outside my door at least once a day. I still went about my business, not really paying it any mind, but I did smudge my room again and took to burning incense at least once a day. You could probably classify these things so far as mildly threatening. I'm assuming it was supposed to scare me or make me regret what I did, but I didn't give a shit. Maybe that's why it decided to take the next step to actually threatening me. My bed at the time. Take note, the bed frame was completely covered, so there were no gaps between it and the ground. Sat against one of the blankets. Since they were technically my walls, it made sense. After a long day of doing nothing, I decided it was time to get a little sleep. Nothing felt off, as weird as it might sound. Took me a while to fall asleep as usual, and it all just felt normal. I had a pretty vivid dream once I actually fell asleep, though. In my dream, I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when something reached through the wall, grabbed me, and pulled me through. It then began to scratch at my eyes and strangle me. Nightmares have never bothered me ever, but this one did. It felt extremely personal. As I lay there catching my breath, I heard something slowly shuffle away from the other side of the wall. Not much more to go from here. While it was freaky in the moment, and admittedly a little while after, I did eventually get over it. A few weeks later, I was watching TV upstairs. At this point, the growling and shadow were still happening, but as usual, I just went about my business. While I had a TV in my room, the one upstairs was a 52-inch flat screen, much better than my shitty old CRT TV. Couldn't tell you what I was watching exactly, just that it was late and I was laying on the couch. At some point I ended up falling asleep, but that didn't last long. I was woken up when I was hit extremely hard in the face. Just after that, my arm began to burn. 4 scratches from shoulder to elbow. My first thought on seeing it was that I was happy that it wasn't there. Any of you familiar with demonic attacks will know why. I ended up with a pretty bad black eye too. I still lived there for another couple months. I just didn't sleep in the living room again. I'd like to say I learned something from all that, but I've told things to fuck off since then.
Be a junkie. There is this heroin or coke dealer who has his little crew and is always throwing cash around doing dumb shit. One day, over there buying my shit for the day, they announce they are all going camping. They love to do impulsive, random shit. I beg to go with, I love camping, especially with crazy, cool people such as these folks. We leave Minneapolis to the wilderness outside Duluth, a group of 7 people setting up camp, disorganized. With all the chaos and getting high, events were not clear until later. 2 dudes go to get firewood and make sure nobody else is around to see us using needles and call cops. Nobody really takes note or cares to remember they leave. 30 minutes later, one guy comes back. Where is the other one? I do not know. I went for wood. He went to make sure we were safe to get high. Whatever, he is probably just nodding off somewhere. 2 goddamn hours later, other guy strolls into camp, looking very not high. Where were you? Oh, looking at birds. Lowell, what the fuck? What junkie likes bird watching? When he walks past, I can see some leaves and twigs in his hair. It starts to get dark. He sits down on a log by the fire, suddenly, awkwardly, like he is really drunk. Hard junkies do not drink. The night is a beautiful temperature, but it is really quiet. No insects and very few birds or owls were heard all night, barely noticed though. People are having a good time talking. Junkies are shameless, chain smoking, and making it look like starting a fire is rocket science. The dude who came back later is acting strange, seems generally confused by our weird activities, completely silent. It has been almost 9 hours since we arrived. Time to get stoned. Dope is passed around. Everyone desperately starts cooking up. Between cooking and strapping up, I notice the guy just smelling the chunk of dope, looking like he cannot handle the smell. He is staring at it like he is concentrating or maybe angry with the force of over 9,000 suns. What the fuck again? Everyone is done shooting up. The guy is still sniffing the chunk. By now everyone notices. He cautiously licks the dope, has an incredibly strong taste and smell of uber vinegar. Makes this horrible animal gagging or hacking sound. The main dealer guy offers to cook and prepare a shot for him. He was already high and did not notice the strange behavior too much. The guy mumbles, "Yeah." He shoots him up. Note, your average junkie does enough dope in one shot to kill King Kong and his whole family. Tolerance is a curse. The guy's whole body starts to shake. His eyes are popping out, everyone still staring with dopey, glazed eyes. He makes this strange, panicked, choking breathing sound, like there is a really wet towel in his mouth or throat. Blood literally pops out of his nose, incredibly dark-colored. He starts to make intense high-pitched screeching scream noise, stopping to choke or cough suddenly every second or two. This is not a normal OD. A horrible, horrible stench permeates the camp. He falls over backwards. Panic ensues. Dude, you gave him too much fuck Pulp Fiction.mauve. The main guy goes to help him up, cannot. The stench increases to the point where the rest of us are gagging and or puking. I hear a very distant, single short scream from the forest. Amid the panic, I think nobody else notices. People were desperately scrambling to give the guy Narcan or something. I was not really looking at him anymore. In the night, I swear I can hear leaves rustling close and maybe far too, but with commotion from junkies, I cannot be sure. Out there, I see a branch swinging as if someone nicked it running by. Definitely see that. Oh shit. I hear the strange scream again, except much closer to the camp. It is coming from right where the light from the fire stopped outside in the forest. Suddenly screeching everywhere, same as before, but I can hear at least 3 different sources or areas it is coming from. It is horrible, like nails on a chalkboard, mixed with what a crow screaming might sound like. Absolutely shocked. Deer in headlights snap back to reality, ears ringing. The horrible stank makes me feel like I cannot breathe. It is so bad, gag reflex choking me. The overwhelming smell and high-pitched ringing are too much to handle. I have a panic attack. I black out. I woke up in the morning. I look around. I'm very shaky, and I can smell hints of stench from last night. Nobody to be seen except that fucking guy, the goddamn guy, boots sticking up from the log he fell off of. I walk over slowly. He looks like he has been dead for weeks. Skin is tight over his face, white and blue, eyes sunken. Looks like he lost 80 pounds before dying. His eyes are creepily still open, bloodshot, mouth drooping open too. Blood covering him, I do not know from where. I realize I'm covered in blood too. There are scrapes and dents or holes all over the ground. Some obviously animal tracks, human footprints, handprints, and combinations of all going every direction. Withdrawing and losing my mind, I steal the main dealer's car, go home, and never speak of it again. I never heard a word from or about any of those people ever again, except for one girl who got put in a psych ward. The campsite was hours from civilization. By car, she had no food or water, and I took the car. How in the fuck did she get back?
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.